Hey everyone! Today I'm going to be doing the beginning of the next part of the MtG Basics series. So far I just went over all of the colors and kind of like talking about what they are and introduction to that color philosophy a little bit. But today I'm going to be talking a bit more mechanical and that sort of thing. So today I am going to be focusing on formats of Magic. Magic can be played in a bunch of different formats. This is something that's like kind of unique almost to trading card games, where you have like different formats that they're played very differently, but they fundamentally work from the same rule set. Or like Dungeons and Dragons, you have different editions of the game, and they play different ways, but they ultimately are like fundamentally different rule sets, where yes, there are some rules differences from format to format in Magic. It still coming from the same core rules perspective. So that's just interesting. And they can kind of be divided into like three main categories. The first being limited, then constructed, and then other middle ground. But let's just start out with probably the one that most people that don't play trading card games are most familiar with, and that is constructed. Constructed essentially means is that you take from your collection at home. I should especially like that these are kinds of formats, not formats themselves. But you take from your collection at home and you build a deck based on the rules of the format you're playing, and you bring it to the event or break it out with some friends, and that's what you play with. So the most like common constructed formats. Constructed is also the format with the most number of formats. So just if you want to play with absolutely everything, every card that's been printed, then that format is vintage. Vintage, well, first I should back up again. It begins. The difference between constructed formats is usually what sets are allowed and ban lists. That's like the main difference between them. And the first one I'm going to talk about is 60 card constructed formats. So these formats are kind of like the core formats. If you think about it, like this is kind of like how the game was intended to be played. Although that's just a whole nother mess of things. But essentially, in these formats, you have to have at least 60 cards, and you don't go over that. You can, but you shouldn't. With no more 4 of any given card in the deck, besides like basic lands. So if you want to, like, with the formats that take everything, the one that's the longest is Vintage. Vintage allows you to play everything. It has the smallest ban list, and it lets you play something called the Power 9. The Power 9 were 9 cards printed in the original sets, Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited, which were these incredibly powerful cards, and they kind of like define the Vintage format. There's the 5 Moxen, which are 0 mana artifacts that tap for there's one for each color. 5 Moxen Time Walk, which is 1 and a blue, take an extra turn. Ancestral Recall, which is 1 blue, and draw 3 cards. Why am I not fitting? Oh, Black Lotus, like the most famously expensive card in Magic, which is just a 0 mana artifact you can sacrifice and add 3 mana to your mana pool. And then finally, it's discard your hand and draw 7 cards. Why can't I remember this? It's the one that, like, is the least powerful by a large margin. That often people say that this should really just be power 8, and this one isn't really on the level of the other ones. But they're essentially just a bunch of very powerful cards. And that's what kind of defines the vintage format. After that, there is Legacy, which is essentially vintage, so you can have everything back to the beginning with a ban list. But that ban list includes the Power 9 and some other powerful cards in vintage. Are there any additional outside the... I'm not sure exactly. I did not look at the ban list. I don't play these formats because vintage decks cost is the same as a down payment on a house, and Legacy decks are still a few $1,000s each, and I don't have that kind of money. The most common place that these are played is actually on Magic Online, where the decks are significantly cheaper, while still not super cheap, just due to the ability to reprint and do things like that a bit easier on Magic Online. So yeah, so those are like the 2 oldest formats. The next one is probably the most popular modern or 60 card constructed format, and that is Modern. Modern isn't the, like, doing with the most recent cards. It's essentially everything from Mirrodin on. So everything from, like, the early 2000s on is allowed in Modern. I don't actually know the year that Mirrodin came out in. The original Mirrodin, not Scars of Mirrodin. It's still, I don't play Modern either, so I actually can't comment that much on Modern, but it's a very popular format. The last Pro Tour, Rivals of Ixalan, was Modern, and it's just very widely played. I personally don't have that big of an interest in Modern, just because it's still a little bit out of what I want to pay, and I don't know, it's not my thing. One of the advantages of having so many different formats in Magic is that not every format is going to appeal to every single player, and that's okay. The next 60 card constructed format that's like the mainline ones is Standard. The other 2 are something called are non-rotating formats, whereas Standard is a rotating format. So Standard usually has between like the last 4 to 6 last sets, and that number's changed over the years, and like as they have figured out like what's a good like rotation speed. So it just takes what is most recently put out in like the last like 2 years you're allowed to play with. And so that one, it's a format that's constantly changing. Like things like Modern, still change, but they don't change as fast as like Standard does, where Standard changes pretty significantly every time a new set comes out. But yeah. So those are like the main 60 card constructed formats. There's another one there's Frontier, which had a lot of hype around it, like about a year ago, which is essentially kind of like, it was branded as the new Modern, which is everything from Magic 2015 on. It was actually invented in Japan, where a lot of the cards before Magic 2015 were really hard to come by, so they needed they needed their own like non-rotating format that would be like easy for them to play, but without that need, it just never really has taken hold, and a lot of the hype that was like around it about a year ago has kind of died away. And then there have been other 60 card constructed formats that have become like try to get off their feet, but none have really stuck around, except for this last one, which is Pauper. I'm actually a fan of Pauper. I haven't done any videos on Pauper because I haven't strayed from the meta very much, and I'm not quite good enough at Pauper, but I really do enjoy Pauper. Pauper is a format with essentially it's often described as almost like vintage light, where you can play with every card of Fritz and Magic, but only the commons. It's a really interesting format with lots of variety and things, but since it is only commons, it makes it very affordable. Like, the most expensive decks are still under $100, which is unheard of compared to even like standard and some of the other cheaper formats where you're looking at like probably at least 200 for like a top tier competitive deck. So Pauper has been around for a while, but has recently been getting like starting to get like a real foothold, especially even though in the last like 3 months or so. So those are like the main 60 card construct formats, but there's also another variation with 2 main formats, which is the 100 card construct formats, generally referred to as Highlander formats, where generally, and there's exceptions to this rule, Highlander means you have 100 cards, but it's singleton. So while 60 are constructed, you can have up to 4 of any card. Highlander formats, you can only play 1 of any given card. Now, the most popular version of a Highlander format is Elder Dragon Highlander, or the official wizard name, Commander. So, usually referred to as Commander or EDH. It is a format where you have one special card in your deck known as your Commander, which you always have access to, so you can kind of build your deck around having this card. The Commander is any legendary creature, and you can only put cards that are in the color identity of your Commander. So usually that's its casting cost as well as any colored mana symbols in the actual Commander's text. Just myself here. I've done many Commander videos, and it is by far probably my favorite constructed format, although Pauper is kind of coming up there in terms of popularity for me. The next format, the other somewhat popular Highlander format is Canadian Highlander. Canadian Highlander was invented in British Columbia, and it's a 100 card singleton format. Step back. One of the other major differences of Commander is, unlike most other formats, which are meant for 2-player, Commander is meant for multiplayer, so more than 2 players. Ideally, it's usually 4. Also, there's like some other changes, like you start at 40 life and things like that, which make it like a very different format. It's much slower usually, and it plays very differently. Like, there is a saying where even if a card is stone unplayable in any of the other formats, you know what? It's actually probably playable in Commander. Although the inverse is true, like a lot of really good cards, like Lightning Bolt is one of those spells which is like amazing in any other format that's legal in, but it's like okay in Commander. It's not wonderful. But moving on, but Canadian Highlander is like in terms of gameplay is much similar to like Vintage, but instead of like a strict ban list for Canadian Highlander, your deck can only have so many points worth of cards, and there's an official like the most powerful cards in the game each have point values. It can only have so many points in your deck, so that kind of like how they get around you just jamming all the best, most powerful cards in your deck. I've tried to get into Canadian Highlander, but it's still a bit too expensive for me. And honestly, it isn't different. Like, I don't know. It's just not what I want to do. Like, I mean, like I said, like, not every format is going to appeal to every player. So, those are the main constructed formats. There are others that have like popped up over the years, but those are like the primary ones that you'll find. Next up is limited. I am primarily a limited player. Limited, as opposed to constructed, where constructed, you bring a deck to the event or whatever. Limited, you don't. You usually are using sealed product, so usually booster packs. There's like some other variations. So the most popular limited format, or at least most widespread, is definitely draft. So drafting is essentially you have ideally 8 people, and you're at a table, and each of you get 3 packs. You open the first pack, you look through it, you choose one card and put it on face down in front of you. And you pass your pack to the next person. You'll receive one then, you'll take a card, and then they'll go around the table until they're all gone. Then you open the next pack, pass it the other way, and you do it for your last pack. And then you build a 40-card deck out of those cards that you draft. And then you play games and stuff. So every event you go to, you have a different deck, and there's like a combination of skill in the games themselves as part of the draft set portion, where you're having to like figure out like what the people around you are playing, so you're like not all fighting for the same cards and things like that. And there's a lot of nuance, which I just absolutely love in draft. Also like draft, there is the other most common limited format is sealed. Sealed is much simpler. You have 6 packs, you open them, and you build a deck of them. There's no passing around stuff, but you get a larger pool, but not all of them. You'll play less of the cards. You have less control over what you get. And then finally, I guess at draft, there's also booster draft. That was booster draft, but there's also cube draft. A cube is usually a set of cards that essentially are put together and designed to be like drafted, where unlike opening booster packs, you make your own packs of them and you play them around. So someone might make a cube that's all about characters with cool hats in them, and this is the hat cube, and there's like different archetypes and stuff like that. There's also cubes which are made of like the custom magic sets. I'm actually making one of those right now. I'll be doing a video on that later. As well as there's a bunch of variation on cubes. I might do a full episode on cubes later because they're actually quite interesting. But then there's also variations on these formats. Like there's draft formats for like less than 8 people and things like that, and they all have their own gimmicks and fun times, but yeah. So next up is, I mentioned the kind of like other category of formats. These are just the ones that like don't really fall into anything else. These both come between like in between formats, which like aren't full formats, but they're their own, or supplemental formats. So first off, probably one of the most commonly played forms of Magic is casual. This is just, it's not so much a format to play, it's like not a formal format, but it's just kind of like people who don't really like pay that, like aren't engaged with like a lot of the larger like Magic community and stuff, who just have some cards and are just like playing with their family or friends. Think about like schoolyard Magic and things like that. That it's one of the most commonly played formats, and there's the exact like rules of what's allowed to play varies from group to group and person to person, and that's a lot of fun. Like there's no wrong way to play Magic, and kind of like casual Magic is kind of like the catch-all for that. There's also just the term of casual formats, where things that like aren't super competitive. So that's things like unset drafts. So like things like unstable, or like kind of like joke sexes are considered to be like casual drafts. Commander in some ways is considered to be a casual format, but one thing I should say on Commander is that there's also like a variation of Commander it's called 2DH as opposed to EDH, which is 2-player Commander, which is a bit more competitive format, and on Magic Online there's a different ban list and it's just a very different meta. But I don't know very much about it and I don't like it. So other weird formats. There's a few like add-on like things that you can do to like different games that can be like added to different formats. One is that I love. I have it, and it's called Plane Chase, which is essentially you have an additional deck that's a planar deck that have like random global effects, and you like go through like different locations in the story and stuff, and they all do different things. You can move through them and spend mana, try to planeswalk. And it's a lot of fun, just kind of like a supplemental thing. I love adding it to Commander and things like that. Similarly, there's another format called there's Arch Enemy, which is also can be added onto other formats. I mean, these products also came with their own decks, but they're really great to just plug into other things. Where Arch Enemy, you have like, it's essentially kind of like a 3v1 situation where one person gets like this deck of like Arch Enemy cards, which gives them really powerful effects and lets them really like bulk up for different effects and things like that. But yeah. But then there's like a bunch of other like just kind of like weird side formats. Like technically, like you can take like the stuff from Explorers of Ixalan and play other formats of that. You can play, there's Judge's Tower and Momir Vig and a lot of other weird like side formats that have arisen through various things. Yeah, no, Magic is really neat in the complexity of ways you can play it, and I think that's really cool. Like, a lot of these formats, a lot of the formats weren't even invented by, like, Wizards of the Coast people who make Magic. They were just made by players, and a lot of, like, the ones when they got large enough got, like, actually officially picked up. But otherwise, like, it's a really neat, like, organic process. Like, I mentioned things like Frontier and stuff, which are like formats I tried to get off, but like didn't go. And honestly, that's something just really neat, that like these things that like people trying to like create new spaces within the game for new ways to play and stuff. And it's just a really cool, one of the things I absolutely love about Magic, and why I feel like it captures so many people, where there's something like, most people can find some format that like appeals to them and they really like to play, or if they get bored with one format or don't like the meta for one, they can just move over to another and play that for a little bit while, and like it helps refresh the game for them. And I think it's just a really cool feature of the game. And yeah, so that's probably about all I have to say about like the various like major formats of the game right now. But yeah, so I'm definitely going to be doing some videos on the 2-color combinations and with some more lore stuff, but I figured I'd spatter in some actual like mechanical videos talking about the specifics of what's going on. I don't really actually have a clear focus on what I'm doing for the series. I'm thinking for some of the lore stuff I might actually just like designate it as like a separate series where there's like an MTG lore series. But I'm not sure yet. But yeah, I guess I will talk to you all later, and I hope you have a wonderful night. Alright, good night.